Ladies and gentlemen, we are switching up the order a little bit this week, so you guys are probably seeing my solo video on Tuesday instead of Nick's. But what we are going to be doing today is we are going to be walking through my latest 2024 Dynasty Fantasy Football Startup Draft. We will be talking about the strategy that I went into this draft with, kind of how it was executed, and then my takeaways from it after we have kind of let that sit and marinate for about a week or so. So with that being said, let's just jump right into today's video. But you know what we got to do first? Let's tuck those shirts in. All right, so the league that we're going to be talking about today is called the Hollywood Huddle. This is a league that is a 12-team league, Superflex, PPR. It is a 1.5 tight end premium, 6-point passing touchdowns, and we play with a league median. Now, these are 30-man rosters, so they're very deep rosters. There's 4 taxi slots at the bottom of the rosters. So we did 34 rounds in this draft to fill that team. And the reason for that is I like to play with these deep rosters because it incentivizes trading, because the only way to get better is not going to be relying on the waiver wire. The waiver wire is very scarce. It's pretty much just UDFAs after the rookie draft that are the best players on the waiver wire. So it does mean you have to trade with your league mates if you want to get better, and that's the reason why we do it. But like I mentioned, for the startup, it is a 34-round draft. We are going to be drafting with a slow clock at about 12 hours, so people can trade over the time of the slow clock. And we also have a third-round reversal in this startup draft. So those are kind of the unique settings, I guess, for it for the most part. But when it came down to setting the draft order, we did a derby. So if you're not familiar with what that is, really what we do is we randomize the draft order in the app, and then what that randomized draft order comes up with, that is the order in which you can select your draft slots. So we'll throw that up on the screen. You can see we randomized it. This is the list that it came out with, and then you'll see the arrow pointing to the draft selection. That is what that person chose. So Tyson was number 1. He picked the 103. I was number 2. I picked the 108. And so on. So you see how we did the draft order with that derby. But let's talk strategy, because going into this startup draft, I had a couple things that I wanted to accomplish during the draft, and that was going to be to go early on the quarterbacks. I typically like to go with a quarterback in the first and in the second round of my startup drafts. I really do like to double tap that quarterback position because it makes you stronger than a lot of your league mates at that position. And so because of that, usually in the third round is where I start filling out the rest of my roster. But typically this offseason, I have seen the elite running backs getting pushed down the board just a little bit because people are fading the running back position. So I have found myself wanting to do the hero running back build, where you take one of those elite running backs and then you punt that running back to probably down to like round 9, 10, 11, allowing you to fill out the rest of your roster there with some wide receiver depth and some tight end depth, really whatever you want. But that was typically the approach that I wanted to do. So in the third round, we would be targeting a hero running back to build this roster around. So double tapping the quarterback position and getting a hero running back in the third round, that kind of set me up with the blueprint of which I wanted to follow going through the first 3 rounds of this draft. And obviously we would stay fluid, but I also knew that there was one player in particular that I just had to have on my team, and I needed to get my first share of Caleb Williams. So Caleb Williams was going to be a priority pick for me, either in the first or the second round. Whatever it was going to take to make that happen, that's what I needed, because I wanted a Caleb Williams share, and that was the priority for me as far as a player goes in these first couple rounds. So we will be targeting him early on. So we'll pull the draft board up on the screen. You see the first round here. This is kind of a pretty normal first round for the most part. Aside from Kyler Murray, who did get reached on, he went at the 106 in the startup draft. And typically that is not where Kyler Murray is going. He is more so a mid-second round pick. So this was the first reach of the draft. This did kind of throw me off because I would like to add Kyler Murray in the second round. He has been one of my favorite second round picks. We just did a best picks video on the channel. He was my selection in the second round. But because he went at the 106 here, that was going to be something that we would have to adapt to. So he was the first and really the only major kind of difference in the first round as compared to what normally happens with ADP. So you see the 107 Joe Burrow, and then we got up to me at the 108. So this is where I had to make a decision. And I was between Lamar Jackson and Caleb Williams with this selection. I tried to trade back. I wanted to gain some extra draft capital and just find my way into Caleb Williams a pick or two later. That was kind of what I was trying to do, but nobody really wanted to come up. Everybody saw that Lamar Jackson was falling. They saw that Caleb Williams was still on the board. There's some wide receivers on the board that are still elite. Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Marvin Harrison. And so the people that were back there, they weren't really interested in coming up for anybody. So I had to make the decision sitting and picking here between Caleb and Lamar. And although I have Lamar Jackson higher than Caleb Williams in my dynasty rankings, one of the priorities for us coming into this draft was to get a share of Caleb Williams. And I knew if I let Caleb Williams go by this pick, that turn there with 9, 10, 11, 12, and then coming back in the second round, there probably was a chance that Caleb Williams didn't go. So yes, I reached on Caleb Williams over Lamar, but that's really the only player I think I reached on Caleb Williams with, because everybody else is probably in the same tier as Caleb Williams right now in my rankings. So we go Caleb Williams here as the 108, and he becomes our first selection here at the quarterback position. And because of that, I instantly got on the phone. I started trying to text my league mates, send DMs, send trade offers, because I wanted to double tap the quarterback position. And so I started trying to see what it would take to move my second round pick up to catch a falling Lamar Jackson. Now, there were a couple conversations that were had, but ultimately nobody really wanted to move out of it, or at least not for what I was comfortable with offering. And so eventually, Rookie and the Vet, he beat me to it. He moved up. He takes a falling Lamar Jackson at the 112. And he really just fell, I think, because of the Kyler Murray reach. But outside of those things, very normal first round, and we ended up taking Caleb Williams. Now, moving on to round two, the names on the board that I was looking at for that double tap would have been Anthony Richardson, Jordan Love, and Justin Herbert. Those are probably the top guys in that tier for me, at least, or probably the only guys left in that tier for me. But you see, Jordo ended up taking Anthony Richardson at the 201, and then he double tapped the quarterback position, getting Jordan Love there at the 203 after moving back on that Lamar Jackson pick. And then it came time for the 204 where it was Justin Herbert and B Smooth was on the clock. So I ended up reaching out to B Smooth. I tried to see if he would be interested in moving back just one spot, but he could see my play from a mile away. He had the same idea as me. Justin Herbert was the last quarterback in this tier, and he ended up doing the same thing that I would have done. He takes Justin Herbert at the 204, and it left me here at the 205 with a decision to make. And so because we were in a new tier here at the quarterback position, I put this pick on the block. I told people that if they wanted to move up, they wanted to come get one of their guys, I'd be interested in moving back, because I was okay taking a guy like Trevor Lawrence or a guy like Jaden Daniels at this quarterback position. Maybe even could have been talked into Dak Prescott as well. But again, nobody was really looking to move up. So I ended up having to sit there and pick, and I ended up taking Trevor Lawrence here. And the reason why was because I felt like it was too risky to start off my startup draft here with two rookie quarterbacks, going Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels. Even though it seems like there's a lot of upside in those two picks, I did feel like it was a little bit too risky for my liking. So I ended up going with Trevor Lawrence here. We're hoping that Trevor Lawrence takes a step forward this year with Brian Thomas Jr. in the offense, Gabe Davis in the offense. And so to avoid the risk and to avoid putting my team in kind of this box of a lot of young rookie quarterbacks that I'm building this roster around, I went with Trevor Lawrence. Now, looking back on these two rounds, it ultimately came down to a couple decisions here. We could have had Caleb Williams and Trevor Lawrence, which is what we walked away with, or we could have had Lamar Jackson and Jaden Daniels. And I think there's arguments for both sides of that coin. And even though Lamar Jackson and Jaden Daniels, it sounds like there's more upside there because of the rushing upside, I do think because this is a 6-point passing touchdown, I do prefer the Caleb Williams and the Trevor Lawrence side. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Are you taking Lamar Jackson and Jaden Daniels, or are you taking Caleb Williams and Trevor Lawrence? Now, moving on to round three here, this is where we got that third round reversal. So you see we're back up on the board at the 305, coming back right to left. And the goal here from the beginning was to land the hero running back in this round. And we were set up in a pretty good situation here because we still had Jahmyr Gibbs on the board and we still had Jonathan Taylor on the board. And worst case scenario, if both of those guys got taken, we could just make a pick for our wide receiver one and go in that type of direction. But I felt very good about what our plan was because we still had two of those elite running backs on the board. Now, I leaned Jahmyr Gibbs in this situation. I wanted Jahmyr Gibbs more than I wanted Jonathan Taylor, but I was happy with either of them. And you saw we had A.J. Brown come off the board and then a reach on J.J. McCarthy at the 302. So this was very shocking, very surprising, but this was good for our plan because it made that running back continue to fall down the board. And then you had 303 here go where Sam Laporta comes off the board, meaning that one of Jahmyr Gibbs or Jonathan Taylor were guaranteed to land to us at the 305. And I thought about reaching out to B Smooth again and asking if he wanted to move back, but I figured, you know what? I'm just going to sit here and pick. I'm not going to waste my time with the move up. I'll take either of these guys. And he ended up taking Jahmyr Gibbs, so I ended up falling into Jonathan Taylor here at the 305, which I've talked about all offseason. One of my favorite picks to make here in the third round as well. So we take Jonathan Taylor as our hero running back in this build. So now that we accomplished our goals of getting those two quarterbacks and our hero running back, it was time to attack the wide receiver room and start filling out this wide receiver room, because these rounds from 4 to 7 are really where I feel like a lot of value is in these startup drafts right now. And it's also good that we decided to go double quarterback early on, because as you guys can see, we saw 23 quarterbacks come off the board in the first 50 picks of the startup draft. So it left a lot of teams hurting at the quarterback position, either at their quarterback 2 or their quarterback 3. And it also caused a lot of quarterbacks to get reached on as we got into these rounds. Now, during this stretch here, we ended up going with Brandon Ayuk, DK Metcalf, Rashee Rice, and Travis Kelce. And I'm a big fan of Ayuk. I think he's a legitimate fantasy football receiver. I think he has the ability to float in that low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 type of range for the next couple of seasons. He's probably going to get a long-term extension to either stay in San Francisco, or at worst, he's going to get a long-term extension to be the wide receiver 1 somewhere else. So I feel very good about him sitting here as my wide receiver 1. And we also went with DK Metcalf. Now, he was a little bit of a settle at the position, because I had tried moving up in this round to land one of the 3 guys that you see go right before me. There were guys like Devontae Smith, DJ Moore, and Zay Flowers who all got selected. I wanted one of those 3, and more specifically, I wanted a guy like DJ Moore because I wanted to stack him with Caleb Williams on this lineup. But that obviously didn't happen, so we ended up taking DK Metcalf, and that's fine because DK Metcalf, he should still float around that wide receiver 2 type of range in our lineup. He has multiple high-end wide receiver 2 seasons under his belt, plus a wide receiver 1 season as well, so he should remain the wide receiver 1 in Seattle. Despite the JSN addition last year, I think we've all seen that DK is just going to be the number 1 there. And we're also going to hope that this offense takes a step forward this year under a new coaching staff. So I feel comfortable with DK Metcalf. Obviously, would have rather had one of the other 3 guys fall to me, but that just didn't happen. So we go DK Metcalf here. And then unfortunately for us, we did take Rashee Rice at the 608. And about 15 minutes right after we make that selection, we get the news that breaks about Rashee Rice getting in trouble at a Dallas nightclub. And we had the photographer incident and some of the other stuff. So unfortunately, that was the talk of the group chat for the next 2 hours. But we take Rashee Rice right before that breaks. In hindsight, if we knew that would happen, or if we would have been on the clock 15 minutes later, we're probably not selecting Rashee Rice there. We're probably more likely going to go for a guy like Jaden Reed, who was drafted at the 612. But hey, it is what it is. You also probably would have hoped that we could have got a Brian Thomas Jr. to fall, so we could have stacked him with Trevor Lawrence. But none of those things happened. We have Rashee Rice on our roster. We got to live with Rashee Rice on our roster now, but we'll see what happens. We'll see how that develops. But he ended up being our pick here at the 6-8. And then in round 7 here, we took Travis Kelce, and simply put, this just felt like a selection that I had to make because the value was too good for a player like Travis Kelce. And I say that because even though it's 1.5 tight end premium, Kelce still averaged 17.7 fantasy points per game in this format, which was more than guys like Puka Nacua, A.J. Brown, Breece Hall, all of these guys who were drafted 4 or 5 rounds higher than where I got Travis Kelce at. So from a production standpoint, he is going to give me top end production, but he only cost us that 7th round pick, so it was more of a value pick for us here. So we'll now move on to the next stretch of picks, and that's going to be rounds 8 through 12, and the goal here was to value hunt some of those veterans again, find some flex positions to fill out that lineup, also find our running back 2 and maybe a quarterback 3 during this stretch. But I'll kind of walk you through what happened here. In the 8th round, we ended up landing George Kittle, and this is a very similar argument to what I just used in that Travis Kelce conversation. I probably would have taken Amari Cooper here. I probably would have taken Mike Evans if they had fallen, just to get the wide receiver rather than getting the double tight end, because I don't typically try and go for the bully tight end type of style unless it falls to me. And this is one of those situations where getting Travis Kelce and George Kittle to fall to you in the 7th and 8th rounds, this just felt like I had to do it. It felt like a value pick again. And it was hard to pass up because when I was looking at the fantasy points per game, George Kittle in this format, 14.7 fantasy points per game. This was similar to the guys like Chris Olave, Jalen Waddle, even Devontae Smith. That was the type of range in fantasy points per game that George Kittle was averaging. So it felt like I was plugging in another high-end asset in my flex position each and every week. So those guys, similar to the Travis Kelce thing, drafted 4 or 5 rounds earlier, and I got George Kittle here in round 8. So I'll definitely be okay playing him as my flex. Now, round 9, here's where we took Deontay Johnson. I think he's probably going to be the target leader here in Carolina. They obviously traded for him. This is going to be a new look offense, and I'm going to be able to plug him in here as my wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 once Rashee Rice is back and out of suspension. And in round 10, we made a trade. So we ended up moving up a couple spots in this round. We go to the 10:05, and we end up selecting Najee Harris for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So this is kind of where we went for our running back 2 in that hero running back build. So we went from round 3 all the way to round 10 without selecting a running back. Najee, he's going to play our running back 2, and he feels very safe in this role. He feels like a good value. He's probably a little bit undervalued here because we now have 1 running back 1 finish, 2 running back 2 finishes, and 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons from Najee. He's probably going to be a probably lower upside RB2, but he should have a safe floor as well. So I feel comfortable with him there. And we ended up taking a couple other running backs later in this draft that we can spell him with on their matchups. And worst case scenario, Najee Harris, he doesn't end up being what we want him to be. The 2025 running back class looks pretty dang sweet, so I think we can replace him in that class with our first round pick if it is the worst case scenario for us. Now, round 11, I played a little bit of chicken. I wanted to wait on the quarterback position, so I passed up on guys like Daniel Jones, Derek Carr, Geno Smith, and we ended up taking the upside of Jalen Polk to potentially be the wide receiver 1 in this Patriots offense with Drake May. That ended up biting us in the butt because as it came back around, you see all of those quarterbacks come off the board. So the game of chicken didn't work out. Round 12, we ended up getting our hand forced. We have to take our quarterback 3 here. So we select Russell Wilson, who we do hope is going to end up being the starter for the majority of the 2024 season for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't, but I just need him to get me through the bye weeks of Caleb Williams and Trevor Lawrence. Now, looking back on this stretch of picks, there is probably something that I would change, and that would be playing that game of chicken in round 11. If I could go back, knowing what I know now, I would probably take Daniel Jones or I would take Derek Carr there in round 11, and then I would just settle for Troy Franklin or DeAndre Hopkins in round 12 rather than doing what I did with Jalen Polk and Russell Wilson. But you live and you learn. In these rounds, it's not necessarily going to make or break your roster. So yeah, I do it differently, but again, it's not going to kill our roster. So it is what it is. So now we'll move on to rounds 13 to 23, I think. So as you guys can see, we have it on the screen right here. We're not going to do the draft board. There's just too many players at this point. We'll show you guys the picks that I made, but I was able to land a couple running backs in these rounds where I was kind of focusing on finding veteran values and shooting upside on some youth. That's kind of the goal for the rest of this, just to fill out the roster. And I was able to find that in some running backs in these rounds. This was a hero RB build, like I've mentioned, so you do probably want to take a couple shots in these rounds on guys that can fill in that RB2, maybe RB3 in case of injury, flex, all of that other stuff during the season. So we ended up landing Zach Moss, who should have some value during 2024. We get Gus Edwards, who also should have some value. And then you talk about the high upside rookies, the youth. We get a guy like Ray Davis, who I've really liked in this draft process. I think he went to a perfect landing spot here with James Cook and the Buffalo Bills. He should have some upside here as well. So I like those selections. And then also in that 21st round, we just handcuff Jonathan Taylor, who is the hero running back of this roster. So we get his handcuff. If he goes down, Evan Hull, at least today, looks like he should be the first guy up, first guy to get the crack at those opportunities. So we ended up handcuffing him there. And I think that that's going to kind of fill out that running back position for us for the most part, at least going into 2024. And then next year we can figure it out again as we go, because I don't really like to look at the running back position further than 1 or 2 years out. Anyways, this should at least get me 2024 season where I have some decent production. Now, I also kind of did the same thing with some of the wide receivers. We have some wide receivers here who should have some production in 2024. Also some guys that have some upside or a little bit younger. And most of the sexy names are gone. They're off the board at this point. So most of the players you're drafting, it feels a little bit gross when you select them, but you got to find the pathway. You got to find a way. You got to find some stuff that you like about these guys. And so I still came away with a couple players that I think have some upside. You see, we took Marvin Mims here at the 14-8. Obviously, a guy who had some high draft capital. He's going into year 2. Now this depth chart is a little bit murky. Troy Franklin, Cortland Sutton, Marvin Mims. Kind of somebody has to establish themselves as the wide receiver 2 in this lineup alongside Sutton, and it's probably going to be the first chance given to Marvin Mims, even though I like Troy Franklin. We'll see what happens. You have to embrace the ambiguous wide receiver room, and so we did that with this Marvin Mims selection. And then kind of a similar bet there in the 19th round, we take Jalen Hyatt. Going into year 2, a younger guy. There is some ambiguity in that wide receiver room alongside Malik Neighbors. So who's going to establish themselves as the wide receiver 2? I'm going to take a bet on Jalen Hyatt here. And also, this was a selection by Nicky. So Nick, he told me Jalen Hyatt was the pick. I told him if I win the championship this year, because he told me to draft Jalen Hyatt, I will buy him a Jalen Hyatt jersey. or maybe I just have to buy myself and wear a Jalen Hyatt jersey. I don't know how it's going to go, but this was also help from Nick right there. He says Jalen Hyatt. I say, you know what? Why not? Now, another pick that I liked in this round is I took Greg Dulcich. I am a firm believer on Greg Dulcich as a guy who is a very low risk but a high upside type of play. Looking at the rookie year, the numbers were very solid. The issue is he's dealt with some injuries, and the injury history is concerning, I think. But similar to the Marvin Mims discussion, he does have some opportunity in this offense. There is very little receivers that have established themselves, and Greg Dulcich, he has what it takes to be one of those receiving threats as a tight end. So I do like adding him here as my tight end 3 on this lineup. And then we also locked down a couple more quarterbacks during this stretch. So I take a high upside swing on a guy like Spencer Rattler. Obviously, there is a chance that Derek Carr is not the long-term answer. I think most of us know that he's not the long-term answer. And even though the draft capital for Spencer Rattler is not necessarily what we thought it would be, this is a player who still has some of the tools. He still has some upside. And if he does get some opportunity to play the quarterback position here in New Orleans, I do think that he can showcase some of those skills. So we will take a flyer on a guy like Spencer Rattler. We'll throw him down on the taxi squad, see what he does, and maybe we fall into a quarterback that can be a producer for our fantasy football teams. And then I also handcuffed Mac Jones to my Trevor Lawrence share there in the 23rd round. And this is primarily because the quarterbacks came off the board quickly. There was not a lot of guys left, and we saw that we kind of got left out in the cold at the QB3. Russell Wilson, we don't necessarily think he is the long-term answer. So in the event that Russell Wilson does get benched, or maybe he doesn't play the full year to where we need him, I do think if there were an injury to Trevor Lawrence, Mac Jones, he can step in. He can kind of be that injury fill-in for us. And there is the chance that with next year's quarterback class looking a little bit iffy, he does only have one more year left on his contract. So maybe in 2025, because of that weak quarterback class, he does find himself as a bridge QB somewhere else, and we can trade him at that point. And then the last little stretch of picks here, we have rounds 24 to 34, and I kind of labeled this as get me the F out of this draft. I don't really want to pick any of these guys. All of these guys are probably not going to be on our teams in 2 years or in a year when the new rookie class comes in and we make those picks and pick up those UDFAs. But you know what? We have to fill out the roster, so that's what we're doing here. Similar idea, find some high upside youth, find some veteran values. That's kind of the plan here. And so at the running back position, we basically went with running backs that have an off chance to find roles that are rookies. And we get Cody Schrader. He goes to the San Francisco 49ers. We also get Imani Bailey and Kalen Robinson, who go to the Kansas City Chiefs and the Jacksonville Jaguars. I just like taking the upside on the undrafted or the rookie running back because maybe they do surprise us. You know, every once in a while you get the James Robinsons. You get those types of players that just break out as a UDFA or as a late round running back. I'm just going to take the swings, throw them on the back end of the bench, and let's see what happens. And then we also kind of took some veterans in Malik Davis and Kareem Hunt. Malik Davis, a murky backfield, embracing the ambiguity over there in Dallas, obviously. And then also Kareem Hunt, a veteran. He has kind of fallen off a little bit over the last couple of years, but maybe he finds himself into a nice signing. He plays for a contender, and you can trade him and sell that value at that point there. Now, the wide receivers in this round, same thing as the clump before. Ugly, don't really want to draft any of them. They're all very much long shots to have any type of production for our roster. But we do take Van Jefferson. Outside of George Pickens and Roman Wilson, there really is nobody there that's established. You can kind of make an argument for a whole bunch of guys. We'll take the shot on Van Jefferson here. Maybe he has some production, maybe not. And then we also took Juju Smith-Schuster. We've seen him be productive. It hasn't been for a long time, but who knows? Maybe Juju Smith-Schuster is a wash. Maybe he's not. But at the 26th round, whatever, there's probably not a likely chance that he's seeing our lineup anyways, but we will take the upside on Juju. And then the last couple selections that I want to talk about here, we also took Tyson Bagent. He is going to be to handcuff Caleb Williams. Again, just like we did with Mac Jones, this quarterback position is very shallow in this type of league. It's very unlikely that you find any type of production off of the waiver wire. So I'm going to handcuff Caleb Williams with Tyson Bagent just in case there is an injury. Probably Bagent is the first guy up. We've seen him be somewhat productive as a rookie when he filled in for Justin Fields. And then I took veteran tight end Tyler Higbee. Now, I don't know how I feel about the Higbee pick, but this just felt like he was being faded way too far because you have guys in the same range like Cam Latu who are being drafted down here at the tight end position. And when Tyler Higbee was healthy last year, and that's a big if because he is coming off of a major injury late in the year, but he was averaging about 9 fantasy points per game, and that would put him in the same type of range as Dalton Schultz and Cole Kmet, who are drafted much, much higher than where Tyler Higbee is. So yes, there's a chance that Tyler Higbee isn't very valuable for our teams, and maybe he just never gets back to that form, but we're using a 27th round pick on him. I'm okay if it just turns into nothing, but the upside of him being a decent contributor that you can probably plug in during bye weeks or during injuries at your tight end position, hey, we've seen it happen before. Maybe it can happen again. So there you have it. That is my latest 2024 Dynasty Startup Draft. Overall, I think I am a little bit unhappy with it, but I don't think it's a bad roster. If I were giving myself a grade, I would say B minus. I think B minus. I've had better drafts, I've had worse drafts, but I think this team should be competitive in 2024. I think I should have a chance to kind of fight for that championship, assuming that I don't take any major injuries at the quarterback position. But I do like the roster. There's probably a little bit of work that I'm going to do in the trade room. We're going to fine tune this sucker and make sure that this turns into a dominant dynasty roster. But overall, I'll give myself a B minus. You guys tell me what you think in the comments below. If you were to grade my roster, what would you give me as far as a grade? And feel free to kill me if you think I have a totally bad roster, the worst roster in this whole league. Go ahead and give me an F, but let me know your grade in the comments down below. You be the teacher, I'll be the student. And that is going to conclude today's video. So if you guys did enjoy the video, go ahead and hit that like button. Also, make sure you're subscribed. More content from me, Adam, Nick, on the way, group videos, all of that good stuff. But we'll see you guys on the next one. Until then, peace out.